So everybody can hear me now?
Yep, everybody can hear.
Excellent. Good morning, and again, thank you for attending our first virtual symposium and fourth annual symposium here at Polaris. As was introduced before, my name is Luis Rodas, and I am a consultant pharmacist here. Bear with us, this is our first virtual symposium, and I will be presenting to you on the topic of human trafficking in the healthcare setting. It's actually pretty interesting because some time ago, when the topics were being reviewed, and I chose to present on human trafficking, I thought I knew a moderate amount about the topic. And as I started delving into it, I took about 3 different Cs from different organizations and started looking up information. I realized that really little of the topic. I kind of feel sorry for my friends at the time because every time I would get near them, that's all I talked about the new stats and new numbers I found. What surprised me is I had a friend who also worked with myself, and we had 16 years of community pharmacy service. And he told me that he felt lucky because he had not ever encountered a victim after I had told him some of these horrible things that happened. And it dawned on me then that after working myself 16 years of community pharmacy, I probably came across hundreds of victims, but did not recognize them as such at the time because of lack of knowledge and training. So I agree that this CE is very important, and I'm very glad that many of our disciplines are now required to take the CE, because hopefully once you learn more about it, you'll be able to recognize all these victims that are around us and do things to help. So without further ado, let's go and begin. Human trafficking in the healthcare setting. Human trafficking is a widespread issue that impacts millions of people worldwide, frequently occurring all around us without our knowledge. The most insidious aspect of this issue is that often victims are within plain sight. This presentation will offer insight and knowledge into the world of human trafficking and the role healthcare providers can play in identifying, reporting, and helping these victims. Now, we will, as far as the objectives we're going to try to accomplish this morning, we will seek to understand the definition, the frequency, and the types of human trafficking, recognizing factors that may increase the risk of victimization among individuals, and see those warning signs for those who may become potential victims of trafficking. You have to learn how to properly report human trafficking activity and identify reporting agencies, community resources down here, local community resources like in Florida, as well as nationwide. We want to comprehend procedures for sharing information related to human trafficking with patients and determine referral options and legal services, as well as public and private services available to these victims. Now, first, I would like to start with some common misconceptions. When I first started researching this topic, these are the things that mostly came to mind. It is believed all victims are immigrants, all victims are poor and undereducated. Trafficking must involve crossing national borders or state borders. Trafficking always involves some type of physical violence. All trafficking is related to the sex trade. Trafficking is only found in illegal businesses. If provided the opportunity, a victim of human trafficking will seek help or seek to escape. Human smuggling is trafficking. Now, as far as the truth, actually, victims can be U.S. citizens, and we'll find throughout this lecture that a surprising amount of human trafficking victims in this country are natural-born citizens or permanent residents, but they can also be undocumented workers. Victims come from all socioeconomic and educational backgrounds. There is both international and national trafficking. No travel is required for trafficking to exist. The means of trafficking may be physical violence, or it may be fraud or psychological coercion. There's a labor trafficking and organ trafficking in addition to sex trafficking. Venues where trafficking occurs can be basically everywhere. Illicit markets, legal businesses, in hospitality, construction, domestic services. Trafficking victims are often afraid to ask for help. They may be emotionally attached to their actual trafficker and may not want to leave or may not believe that there's an option to leave. They sometimes don't even see themselves as victims. Persons consent to being smuggled through illegal means or legal means. Smuggling of people is not considered trafficking. It is only considered trafficking when it's without their consent or choice. Definition of human trafficking. The United Nations defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, deception, of the abuse of power or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purposes of exploitation. The Department of Homeland Security has a far more concise definition. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. It involves use of force, fraud, and coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Now, you will see those three words repeated many times throughout this presentation as a definition of what entitles human trafficking: force, fraud, and coercion. Now, let's start with some of the statistics worldwide. In 2016, the ILO, International Labor Organization, estimated that there were 5.4 trafficking victims for every 1,000 people in the world. And 1 in 4 of those victims was a child. This means that over 40.3 million victims were being trafficked in 2016, and that number has only gone higher. 24.9 were into forced labor, including 4.8 million into sexual exploitation, 50.4 million into forced marriage, and 90% of those in the sex industry were women and children. These numbers are believed to be woefully underreported. It is believed that one of the reasons for the reluctance of self-reporting is out of fear, shame, and also the hidden nature of human trafficking, and the lack of public awareness, which is something that hopefully we will be able to address today. Now, going through my research for this presentation, I went and looked for videos and stories so I could show some clips. First thing is obviously popped up where the celebrity or the famous ones, stuff like, the Epstein case and the Nasira case, the R. Kelly case. But I wanted to find more local information. This small collection of news clips you're about to see are all North America, United States, and Canada, basically. And I just wanted to show you these because it brings it closer to home, and it just gives you a small glimpse.
Teenage girl is safe tonight, and 4 people are under arrest charged with human trafficking.
Now, the girl told police that she was forced to have sex with multiple men in a hotel room in Marietta. Fox 5's
An alleged human trafficking ring busted in Hillsborough County. Deputies rescuing 5 women. 6 people are now facing charges. ABC Action News reporter Heather Lee showing us what first tipped off deputies.
So you don't have to deal with the scary stuff.
I believe it's this one, which is hard to see.
Investigators.
They were working 14, 20-hour days, 7 days a week, no real time off.
Detectives say the women weren't allowed to leave, were watched by cameras and followed. On February 28th, after 3 years of investigating, SPD moved in with the help of the feds.
The trick was that we were able to secure the principals so that they would not be able to communicate with one another. We were able to hit all of those locations at exactly the same time as well.
They rescued 26 women, victims of sex trafficking.
31 people have been arrested following a major investigation into human trafficking. Police in York Region, north of Toronto, say officers from several provinces took part in the operation. More than 300 charges have been laid. The lead inspector says it appears to be run by a criminal organization operating across Canada.
Our top story tonight, dozens of children rescued during a nationwide sex trafficking sting.
The FBI teamed up with at least 10 local police departments to save a dozen minors in Metro Detroit.
Okay, so that was a small glimpse of some of the stories that I found in local news. Now, that last story you heard is especially heartbreaking. They described how they found dozens of children were rescued and around the area of Detroit. When they took inventory of the children, they found that the majority of them were as young as 13 years old. The youngest of them was 6 months old. Now, these are children that are being sold for sex trafficking. So when you see a victim that's 6 months old, it's just hard to grasp that concept. You would think that's uncommon, but no. In October 2017, the FBI, along with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, recovered 84 children and arrested 120 suspects. This operation was called Operation Cross Country. It went on for 3 days and included 55 FBI field officers. At the end, the average age of these kids was 15 years of age, and the youngest was 3 months old. This baby was being sold alongside with her 5-year-old sister, and the price for the two of them was $600. In 2017, I've heard a story of Carla Jacinto. She was 12 years old when she was targeted and trafficked from Mexico City to the United States. In her interview, she looked into the reporter's eyes with her voice cracking slightly and told him 43,200. By her own estimate, 43,200 is the number of times she was raped and after falling into the hands of traffickers. She was forced to service up to 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week for the better part of 4 years. In 2018, nearly 150 children were rescued. In March of 2018, the Department of Justice issued through Operation Broken Heart, they were able to catch up to 2,300 online sex offenders. Now that's very important right now because with the event of COVID, and we're all being stuck at home and unable to, some of the kids who can't go to school, they found an increase because kids are feeling lonely and they're spending most of their time on social media, whether tablets or iPhones. And this is particularly easy for traffickers and pedophiles to go in there right now and start grooming the process because they find children that are vulnerable and they're alone and they're spending all this time in social media. In 2019, the initiative coined Independence Day rescued 103 minors in the US. Most of these arrests were done in Atlanta, Seattle, and Vegas. September 22nd, 2019, Operation Safety Net rescued 35 missing children. The point of all these is that many of these investigations were begun because people like you, like ourselves, and healthcare providers saw something and it triggered that instinct that there was something off. And they approached law enforcement or reached out to the trafficking hotline. So this is what I hope we can convey through this presentation is that we can all make a difference, but we have to learn how to pay attention.
Teenage girl is
now bringing it down to the United States. Now, the previous video you saw was mostly North America, including Canada. Now, in the United States, you see the hotspots of the United States, the East Coast, California, and Florida. We are one of the hottest spots in the world because of the influx. Also in this list, you see Florida, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maine, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. Now, the United States human trafficking became a federal crime in the year 2000 when they passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPA. This act aligns with the United Nations Convention of Trafficking Protocol, and there are 3 P paradigms, which is prosecution of traffickers, protection of victims, and prevention of crime. The TVPA defines a victim of human trafficking as anyone induced to perform labor or commercial sex acts as a result of force, fraud, and coercion. Those are 3 words. And further differentiates the severe forms of trafficking in persons, defining them as sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, and the person has not attained 18 years of age. The TVPA recognized seizure of documents, psychological manipulation, and trickery as a means of controlling victims. Now, since the year 2000, when this law first came into effect, there's been some addendums to it. In 2003, it established that federal civil rights actions for trafficking victims to sue their traffickers. In 2005, they added provisions to fight sex tourism. In 2008, it established requirements that inform worker rights would be provided by the government to everyone applying for work or educational-based visas. Because this is seen a lot with domestic abuse, trafficking. In 2013, the creation and strengthening of programs to ensure the U.S. citizens would not purchase products made by victims of human trafficking, as I'm sure you've heard in the news about sweatshops. Additionally, in 2012, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Blue Campaign originated a unified collective effort to combat trafficking. This collaborative effort involved law enforcement, government, non-governmental officials, and private organizations. And they would combat trafficking through resource assistance for victims and reporting in places where they can call in with tips. Unfortunately, even though these efforts started back in 2000, up to recently, every year there's been a continued increase in human trafficking. That's why it got to the point where this problem led to a call for human trafficking to be viewed and managed as a public health problem, not just a criminal problem, which is why we are now required to take this course. Because the magnitude of the problem is so big, it had to be looked at through a different paradigm. Now, human trafficking in the United States, we'll look at the numbers. In 2011, the CIA estimated that 50,000 victims are trafficked through the United States or transported through the United States every year. Although some estimates believe this is much higher, the fact remains that the annual number is continuing annually, this annual influx to an estimated that we have currently about 500,000, over 500,000 children working in forced labor and sex industries in the United States today. According to a study of the United States Department of Justice and Human Trafficking Task Force, 83% of sex trafficking victims identified were actually U.S. citizens. As you remember, some of the misconceptions about them being imported. The average age that a trafficked victim is first used for commercial sex activity averages from 14 to 12 years of age. By that percentage, about 415,000 of the 500,000 that we discussed earlier, they're children. In 2012, the Florida House Bill 99 about sexual exploitation was passed, known as the Florida Safe Harbor Act, which allows law enforcement to either arrest, it gives them the choice to either arrest or to send minors into a short-term safe house. Also in 2012, House Bill 7141 expanded the provision requiring the health department to develop and adopt a screening instrument for helping identify sex victims. Further down this presentation, you'll see I'll include a link that will give you access to this tool that was developed. It's like a flow chart that helps you easily define it, with boxes and everything to see if the victim is a probable victim of human trafficking or not. Also in 2012, specialized training in human trafficking also became mandatory for child protective investigators, case managers in Florida. Now, let's narrow down to Florida. Florida was considered a gateway state. It has innumerable ports, year-round demand for farm labor, and high demand for the sex industry. Florida ranks third in the nation in the number of calls for the National Human Resource Trafficking Hotline. Between 2009 and 2015, Florida recorded more than 68,000 cases of children who have been trafficked in reports. The children were often arrested as juvenile offenders, and instead of trafficking victims, they are often seen only as substance abuse victims. That's why they specify that correctly identifying these victims is imperative. Law enforcement has stated that correctly identifying perpetrators is nearly impossible. Sometimes the easiest thing they can do is arrest the victims. In a Florida study of 913 youths who were reported to have been involved in human trafficking, 28.8% were 12 years of age or younger, and 87.7% were female, and the majority experienced some sort of sexual violence in the family. This is why professionals like yourselves and child protective services, schools, juvenile justice centers are most likely to be the first point of contact for children who are victims of sexual trafficking. In 2016, the Florida Statewide Council of Human Trafficking was created. And this council consists of 15 members. It includes representatives from law enforcement, prosecutors, and legislators, and representatives. It includes also health and education and social services. The council is chaired by the Attorney General of Florida. The council's duties include recommendation of comprehensive programs and services, and creation of safe houses and foster homes, as well as the development of recommendations for apprehending and prosecuting and coordinating responses in these cases. They hold an annual statewide summit every year. It is believed that 87.8% of traffic victims seek medical care at some point during their exploitation. This clearly indicates that healthcare providers have a responsibility to help these people and possibly identify trafficking rings. Now, let's go over quickly over the 6 main types of human trafficking. Primarily, the most common is sex trafficking. Sex trafficking includes individuals transported or relocated to engage in forced sexual activities. This category includes men, women, and children. Forced labor trafficking encompasses several types of human trafficking. Forced migrant work, forced labor, both on the seas, and child factory. This is where you get your sweatshops. Organ trafficking and egg trafficking. This involves surrogate pregnancies, forced organ donations, and coerced marriages. Debt bondage. Debt bondage is indentured servitude for family labor or for payment. Domestic servitude. Domestic servitude encompasses domestic services to pay a debt. And child soldiers. Child soldiers are individuals under the age of 18 who are coerced or forced to engage in armed conflicts. Now we'll start with sex trafficking, which is the most common one. Sex trafficking involves the use of force and coercion and can encompass other forms of criminal sexual activities, including erotic dancing, mail order brides, and pornography. As you will see, pornography, one of the entities when I was researching for this that I found is Exodus Cry. And Exodus Cry is actually vehemently opposed against a particular site called Pornhub. Found that it's actually a gateway for trafficking. Although also highly controversial, it said that sex trafficking victims differ from prostitution, and that sex trafficking victims are forced to involuntarily perform sexual services and are not paid for their work. In 2006, a European study found that most women in the sex trade with of abuse, physical or sexual, has also found that a surprising number of them, including boys and adult males. Now, this is starting to change somewhat because in Amsterdam, where prostitution is legal, they came to realize that it was almost a gateway for trafficking because it was legal. It held that the big red flag to letting people come in and perform these acts. So traffickers started coming in and bringing their victims. So in recent years, Amsterdam has closed about 40% of its red light district as far as prostitution. Sweden took a different approach. Sweden saw this increasing rate of sex trafficking. So they changed their legislature to affect men and traffickers, the Johns and traffickers. So basically, if they caught any sort of trafficking going on, they would arrest the trafficker or the pimp and the John who's requesting, because without them, there would be no demand, and would offer the victim counseling. And through their wiretaps, as they launched this huge concerted effort, they found that many of the traffickers in their conversation were saying that Sweden is too much of a hotspot, and it has decreased greatly in Sweden. Eastern Europe, according to Exodus Scribe, Eastern Europe has been called the frontier of failure in the battle against human trafficking. As an example, Moldova Eastern European country, formerly Soviet Republic, has a population of 2.6 million. Since 1989, over 400,000 women have been sex trafficked from Moldova. That's almost 1 out of 6 people of the total population. Thailand, 2.8 million girls are currently in prostitution. 800,000 of those are children. Cambodia. The culture is such in Cambodia that 80 to 90% is estimated of families in Cambodia sell one of their children for sex trafficking. UNICEF has stated that 19,250 are currently trapped in prostitution in Cambodia. Exodus Cry's model is to fight for the freedom of people sold for sex. They follow the tenets of William Wilberforce, an early 19th century, in early 19th century Britain. He was faced with similar challenges as we are facing today. He lived in a society that permitted and embraced slavery as a normal way of life. He knew that to enact change, he would need to change the culture. So he, alongside many like-minded abolitionists, launched a strategic grassroots campaign to educate the masses and change public opinion. Though it took decades, Wilberforce helped bring about a historic shift in the minds of people, resulting in the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. Now, Exodus Cry has an award-winning film about trafficking. And this is a small expert. I was able to reach out to them, and this is a small expert from their human trafficking documentary.
We met with Don Brewster, the director of Agape International Missions, and he's been on the front lines of the battle against child prostitution in Cambodia since 2005.
We did some work, some undercover work for IJM in a karaoke bar in Siem Reap. We went in, 200 to 300 girls waiting for us when we get in there, big numbers on their chest. You just pick whatever girl you want. And it's a weird feeling. It's almost like the girls don't know how to feel. Like, please, oh God, don't pick me, versus if you don't pick me, how am I gonna have any money? How am I gonna take care of my family? You know, I mean, it must be hell that they have to go through. But you walk into the place and the manager comes up to you and he says, I want you to know, when in the karaoke room, you can do anything you want to the girl. I mean, you can touch her, you can kiss her, whatever you want to do, but you can't have sex before you negotiate a price. Now you get into this karaoke room, gigantic flat screen TV, a high-tech karaoke system with over 2,000 songs in English, 6 cordless mics, beautifully appointed, private bath, 80 rooms like that in this place. This guy owns 8 places like this. That's 16 to 2,400 girls. And we estimate, and we're conservative, that at least a third of them were underage. So you choose your girl, you go to the room, and a woman comes in to police the room. But people would think she comes to protect the girls. She comes to make sure the girls are going after the men, that they're cuddling up to the men, that they're getting the guys to want to have sex, to pay for the big bucks for sex. So we get ready to leave, and I can pay with my credit card. Okay, so you pay with your credit card, and here's your receipt that you get. Tiger beer, $4. Bunch of grapes, $5. Karaoke girl for 1 hour, do whatever you want to her, $3. Well, we're getting ready to leave, right? And one of the girls with one of the other guys doesn't want to go. And so she starts running away. Now, we've already paid. She starts to run away. The manager goes, gets her. I mean, literally, as close as you can get to without beating her, screaming at her that she needs to go with us and do whatever we say and smile all the time. So my wife and the counselors talk with them and say, you know, we have a place you can get out of this. We have a place where you can come and we can make sure you get healthy and you'll get good food, you'll get an education. We can help you to have a brand new life. And the 3 of the girls that we had just wept. They think that there was that opportunity. There was only one thing we needed to do to be able to take them. They needed their mothers to say it was okay. We called all 3 moms. All 3 moms said no. All three mothers said, no, we're not gonna, they can't do it, we need the money. We told them, we'll actually give you a loan to start your own business. We'll provide all the things you need with it. We'll provide you training and everything you need to start your own business, and your daughter can go get a great education, and when she's done, she can earn way more money, and she'd be in a way better situation. Even after all that, all three mothers said no. And so we had to drive those girls back to the karaoke bar.
So as I mentioned before in Cambodia, that there has to be a paradigm shift. Up to 80 to 90% of families, that is a common practice. When they have a girl is born, they're congratulated because now they have a money earner in the family. So, on to the next type of track, forced labor. The definition of forced labor trafficking includes slave labor, rarely identified as such in the United States, migrant work, which we see a lot here in Florida, forced labor on the seas, and child factory work. Undocumented immigrants and families are often include their children in migrant work and factory labor. They employ entire families. Predominantly seen in China, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Philippines, children in factories are found working. These are what we usually refer to as sweatshops. We have organ trafficking and egg trafficking. Victims of this form of trafficking may experience unknown theft of body parts or be abducted specifically for their eggs or vital organs. There's been increasing reports of forced and coerced trafficking and organ donations in India. Victims recruited for large sums of money end up at gunpoint or just left without any pay. The market for trafficking kidneys in India, for example, has been seen to increase lately. The recipients of these trafficked organs frequently come from the United States and from Europe. They're not aware of where the organs come from or that they are harvested by unwilling donors. But sometimes it's just, they prefer not to ask the questions. Pakistan, the Philippines, Egypt, these are popular places for living donor trafficking. Communicable diseases, including HIV/AIDS, are often undisclosed to these donors who buy these organs. Frequently, young women in Asia are forced to become egg donors. They are given hormones to increase the production of multiple eggs. They are paid small amounts for their donation, and any complications that may arise from the donor are the donor's problems. Some women remain in these type of situations repeatedly. So if they find one that is especially viable, they will keep her trapped like an animal and just keep pumping hormones until they can get as many eggs as she's viable. In 2016, it was reported that Romania, together with Eastern European countries, including Turkey, has gradually begun to adopt laws to combat human trafficking, including the trafficking of human eggs and embryos. Debt bondage. One form of trafficking that has recently seen also another rise is debt bondage. Debt bondage includes indentured servitude, family labor for repayment. Although more prevalent in India and other Asian countries, family labor has been documented in Chinese restaurants in the United States with connections to trafficking networks. Now, I don't know if you recall, one of the videos we saw earlier showed those the massage parlors. So massage parlors and nail parlors are very common. Those full massage parlors. Next time you go one, just keep your eyes open and see. And it's pretty common when we have families that are working there for, $10. Domestic servitude. Domestic servitude refers to a category of domestic workers, usually female, who work in forced labor as servants, housekeepers, maids, or caregivers, most often in private homes. Domestic workers are often not free to leave employment. They are underpaid or not paid at all because they work in private homes. Their isolation and vulnerability is increased. The U.S. Department of State has stated that domestic workers, especially women, often face forms of abuse, including harassment, exploitation, and sexual abuse. Their passports or identification papers are commonly taken away, and they are told they must pay off debt incurred for their travel, processing fees, and other expenses. Since many do not speak English, they find that they have no other recourse but to endure the exploiting conditions. Unfortunately, as in many sectors of forced labor, there are no regulations to monitor conditions under which domestic servants operate. Now, when I was researching for this, I came across this one story of this girl, Sarah. Now, Sarah was brought from South America to work, to work as a nanny for a rich couple. She was captivated by the concept of the American dream and by the lavish lifestyles that she saw on TV. She was hoping to come to this country and study and perhaps gain a profession and help her family back down to South America. Little time after she came, she realized that it was a full-time job. Not only did she have to take care of the kids, but she was expected also to cook, to clean the house, do laundry, iron. Then she had to do yard work and keep that. So she quickly realized that she had very little time to study, but she still retained a shred of hope. Shortly after that, the husband started making a tour of essence to her. When she tried to back away, he took her ID, her passport, and told her that if she didn't play nice, that he would just deport her. So the wife at this point found out that there was something going on, and instead of taking it on the husband, they took it on her. So her life became a living hell. She was continuously abused and then shunned by the wife. So finally, one day she had enough and she ran off to the streets. She left her passport, her ID, her clothes, and she just ran away. It wasn't long before a trafficker saw her and, approached and said, do you need shelter? Do you need food? And by the end of the first week that she was out, she was prostituted in the corner. It just kept getting worse. Luckily her case was one of the lucky ones because she was able to come across a healthcare provider. And they told her of her options. And after some time, she was willing to follow those options. And eventually she was even able to mount a legal case against the husband. But her case is extremely rare. Child soldiers. It is estimated that 250,000 to 300,000 children younger than 18 years of age are currently serving as child soldiers. Traffickers see children as inexpensive, easily molded, and shaped to comply without question. Indoctrinated children are most likely to kill fearlessly and recklessly. Child soldiers are treated as adults without regard to how physical and psychological rigors of war may affect their psychology and development. In Uganda, child soldiers are habitually recruited. The Lord's Resistance Army is known to initiate children in brutal ritualized killings. They make them kill their friends or family members, and this results in them breaking them into submission. They destroy any more reservations against killing that they may have. In Afghanistan, children are recruited by the Taliban to serve as suicide bombers. Others join these military groups to escape poverty, to defend their communities, or out of a feeling of revenge. Girls are not as commonly recruited into these as child soldiers, but when they are forced to join as victims of sexual violence. They're used and passed around as prizes. Orphan and refugee children also join soldiers willing. They're seeking some sort of acceptance of a new family. When you have these places where they're torn by war and ravaged and they're alone without a family, they look to these armies as some semblance of family. These children still want love and inclusion and often become willing victims of trafficking. So who's at risk? The demand for cheap agricultural labor, prostitution, fertility services, pornography, and other forced labors perpetuate trafficking. Human trafficking has been described as a transnational organized crime. As the third most profitable of crimes next to drugs and gun smuggling, the profits in 2008 alone were estimated to be $31 billion. Now, that's a very large sum of money, but that's not worldwide. That's just in the United States. The United States has been described as the world's largest market for traffickers, largely because of the media representation of vast opportunities and elaborate lifestyles available. And this helps the recruiters bring people who are attracted to this. New programs and international laws have sought to prohibit human trafficking. In 2000, the United States, after criminalizing trafficking, by 2010, most states had passed laws. In 2003, the United Nations developed a regulation that defined trafficking as the criminalized trafficking beyond simply prostitution, including the exploitation of forced labor or services or even organ trafficking. Reporting suspected human traffickers is complicated by the fact that victims know little or nothing of their perpetrators. See, these crime organizations are conducted as such, as gun trafficking or drug smuggling. There's different strata, so it's very hard to take it all down. There's different levels of it. One example is the reporting of enforcement and trafficking in fertility services. This reporting has been almost non-existent because the victims rarely see themselves as victims. They're generally paid small amounts and do not realize the risks that they have incurred. As expected, the egg donors and surrogate mothers are paid only for their products and not any medical consequences that may arise as follow. Now, these victims, and especially in the harvesting or as surrogate mothers, they are treated well during the time they're pregnant, so they almost feel a degree of acceptance. And as soon as the child is delivered, they're just left to their own devices. Any medical complications are not covered. The problem with these is they miss that feeling of acceptance they had while they were pregnant. So many of them will not tell or try to report these instances because they still hope that perhaps they can do it again, or their services will be needed one more time, so they can at least get that semblance of love. These donors are still reluctant to report in underground networks out of fear that that their complaints will mean that their services will no longer be required. How to identify victims. Reporting suspected human trafficking is essential in curbing the abuse of this modern slavery. Arrests have increased dramatically since the Trafficking Victims Protection Act back in 2000. However, many of these arrests involve only the victims. Successful prosecution of trafficking crimes in U.S. agriculture, sweatshops, suburban mansions, escort agencies, brothels, lounges, strip clubs have all increased. But again, a great deal of those arrests are still being arrests of the victims themselves. Immediate notification of a suspected case may be a potential human trafficking is held by different organizations in trafficking prosecution. First, the greatest challenge is identifying these victims, differentiating these victims from the actual traffickers. In 2017, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, established the Blue Campaign, or Truckers Against Trafficking. They were able to identify the trucking industry as one of the lifebloods of America, as they travel, and they have this great vantage point to be able to identify and see and come across lots of the trafficking points where victims are trafficked in America. The trafficking victim also produces brochures, shares information, and they've printed out all this assistance in 10 different languages to pass out throughout the United States. First responders and emergency room clinics and healthcare providers such as yourselves are usually the first to see the victim of human trafficking. These victims are more likely to describe their plight to medical personnel than to law enforcement, as they have been trained to fear law enforcement. Unfortunately, many physicians, nurses, and healthcare workers probably do not understand the danger of the situation and the need for it to be reported. Distinguishing human trafficking victims from domestic violence victims can be very difficult as well. The primary distinction is the trafficking victim is usually has fear of multiple people, as opposed to a domestic victim who usually has fear of one specific abuser. Trafficking victims are typically isolated from any family or friends and are often international victims who fear law enforcement and have poor understanding of our legal system. The triad of substance abuse, malnutrition, and infectious disease are more likely to indicate that this particular victim is a trafficking victim. Some of the signs. 3 cardinal signs you'll see are demeanor, history, and situation. In demeanor, the victim may demonstrate signs of fear, depression, anxiety. Story. The story may be fragmented or reported with evasiveness of details. A patient who reports that they had a fall but can't remember why they fell or what they struck upon falling. Lying in order to avoid reporting workplace injuries or physical abuse. And situational. Situational red flags include the continuous presence of another person, often male, who's positioned themselves to be always in view of the patient. Victims may have trouble making eye contact and will only spare brief glances to their perpetrator and trying to ask for permission whether they can answer questions or not. Research of the symptoms of trafficking survivors has identified the prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and somatic expressions of trauma, including headaches, dizziness, fatigue, and back pain. Rushing to treatment and discharge can have deadly consequences for the patient who faces continued abuse. Now, how to approach victims. Emotional signs may be hard to identify, making establishing trust very difficult. Privacy and gender matching helps, especially with certain ethnicities. You have to be aware that there is a certain degree of reticence with male and female, or sometimes matching female and female will help them be more at ease and confide upon you. Also, increasing the likelihood of avoid asking the questions repeatedly, because this often traumatizes them. Overtaxed providers and decreased contact time can lead to making quick value judgments when you are confronted with a disheveled appearance of a patient who smells like alcohol or has vague symptoms. These are things that awareness and training can increase the likelihood of recognizing these signs instead of just dismissing them. Some providers have only a few seconds to shake hands with the patient and very little personal contact. But with this training, hopefully, it'll help identify these signs. Now, armed with this knowledge, these seconds can allow the provider greater access or greater chance of identifying a potential victim. Reporting suspected cases of human trafficking is a professional responsibility for all healthcare personnel. Accurate documentation and reporting is the only way to save lives and help end this modern day slavery. Additionally, reporting suspected cases to medical and nursing administration, social services, and mental health as necessary. Healthcare workers have a professional ethical obligation to advocate for the patients by reporting the cases to law enforcement. Often, they may wish to help and do the right thing, but they don't know how to proceed. One of the most excellent places to begin is the National Human Trafficking Center. This center can be contacted with tips or training materials. The center is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-888-737-3888. And you can also text Be Free, 233-733, Be Free. Now, this is run by a corporation called Polaris Project. They've been manning these for decades now. Assessment and safety. The priority should always be ensuring the safety of the patients and of your staff. A victim who has escaped her trafficker to get medical care is likely being pursued by the trafficker or conspirators. Healthcare staff may be feeling threatened or reluctant to care for these survivors and these victims out of fear of reprisal. Any suspected case of abuse or trafficking should include alerting security. If someone is accompanying the patient, a private code such as Code Yellow can alert security, stand by, and stay out of sight. Predators may not seem menacing at first, but they are commonly part of a network of traffickers that can be activated to keep the victim from reporting the actual abuse situation or operation. X-ray procedures by healthcare providers is an excellent opportunity to separate the victim from anyone in your company. It is an ideal starting point if you really suspect one of your patients is a sex trafficking victim. Order an X-ray, and then you can always dismiss it if it's not needed. Nursing assessment should begin with the patient's general appearance. Does the clothing and hygiene seem appropriate? The low body weight or obesity can both indicate poor diet poor nutritional status may signal trafficking. Dental hygiene may be easy to observe as the patient talks or through an oral examination. Oral health of an individual reflects overall systemic health and certain systemic diseases. Assessment for the presence of the following conditions should be part of a physical examination. If you see a white line among the lateral borders of the tongue, this is often found in HIV patients. Skin eruptions, erythema multiforme, skin ulcers may be indicating drug use, designer drugs or street drugs, or infections, including HSV or other immune disorders. Perioral, oral phalangeal soft tissue lesions or burns, intraoral piercings, or abnormal asymmetric gag reflex can indicate sexual oral abuse and injury. Necrotizing gingivitis, commonly referred to as trench mouth, foul-smelling breath or white necrotic tissue along the border of the gingiva, associated with the triad of extreme stress, poor oral hygiene, and tobacco use. Pyogenic granuloma or capillary may indicate pregnancy. Missing or broken teeth, traumatic avulsion, malnutrition, chronic decay, or neglect or rampant decay, especially along the gum lines, may indicate dry mouth associated with amphetamines or opioids. Signs of swelling or fistula on the attached gingiva or sublingual submandibular spaces indicate dental abscesses, and these are often lead to need of immediate dental treatment or exam, as they can lead to further complications. Any sign of chronic or acute dental infection should warrant treatment. Now, how to assess your potential victims. Recognizing the suspected victim is the first step, but is often difficult because signs can be quite subtle. The following questions help us, healthcare providers, assess possible human trafficking. Are there bruises or other signs of physical abuse? Are there signs of psychological abuse? Is a person submissive or fearful? So when you approach them, are they recoiling at your approach? Is a person being controlled? Or is there somebody else in the room that's directing their movements or their actions? Is the person being deprived of food, water, sleep, medical care, or other life necessities? Is the person allowed to be in public alone? Or do they always have an escort with them? Can that person freely contact friends or family? Because as you learn, one of the main things is they isolate the victim to keep them from contacting anybody from the previous life. Is the person a minor engaged in commercial sex, or does the minor appear to be in a relationship with a much older person? Now, one of the stories that I couldn't fit in the previous clip was about a couple of years ago, they had in the news a flight attendant who had seen this. The flight attendant didn't have much training, but she was going down the aisle and she noticed that one of the passengers was a well-dressed man with a suit and clean cut, and an older gentleman. And next to him was a girl, a very young girl, with a hoodie and looking disheveled. And whenever she tried to approach, she said, "Honey, are you okay?" The man would always speak for her and quiet her off. Well, she managed to leave a note and ask her a question in the restroom, and the girl managed to say, "I need help." So, quick thinking, they contacted the local authorities in Health and Human Services, and by the time the plane arrived, they arrested the man and they were able to free the child. Does this person fear his employer, like we just mentioned? Can a person leave the job if he or she wants? Has someone threatened the person's family? Especially with the organ donations and surrogate mothers, you see that many of the times in indentured servitude, they don't leave is because of fear of threats, not only to themselves, but to their family. Does this person have identification, or does this person know their address? As identification, in the case where we spoke earlier of Sarah, one of the ways they controlled her was by taking away her ID and any sort of identification. And many of the traffickers, like we saw with the girl from Mexico, they don't know where they live because they're transported from place to place as they are used for sex trafficking. Now, assessing child victims is going to be slightly different because it has to be a different approach. Assessing a potential child victim requires subtler questions. A child may not identify what has happened as submissive. Many of these children who are start this at a very young age, they don't know the difference, and they don't know that they're the victims of trafficking. This is all they've known. Avoid using yes or no questions. Questions don't provide enough actual information. And try using more fill in the blank or open-ended questions to allow plenty of time to yield better information with the questions. Don't ask the patient if they ate. Perhaps come in and like, I had so-and-so for breakfast, and what did you have today? Or what's your usual breakfast like, or lunch or dinner? Don't ask them direct questions. Ask, where did you sleep? Or can you tell me about this bruise? You can tell them, oh, I had a bruise last weekend. I see, oh, you had one too. What happened? How did you get that? Or if they've slept recently, you can tell them, I have family from out of town and I slept on the couch last night. Oh, where do you usually sleep? So try to make a conversation. If possible, at all, avoid letting the guardian answer the questions. Earning trust. Now, this is also part of earning trust with the child. Basic interpersonal sensitivity and caring has to be used to prompt trust with your victim, with potential victim. Sitting at eye level with the patient, attempting to see a patient without the person who accompanied him or her. Asking non-judgmental questions. That's extremely important. When you ever approach a potential victim, you have to come with a non-judgmental way. Make it clear that the patient's safety is your priority, and this will help elicit potentially specifics about whether they're being trafficked or not. If needed, the services of an interpreter should be obtained, as some of these victims obviously do not speak English. Personal distance, gender crossing, and touching vary from cultures, as I mentioned before. In some cultures, it's easier to connect with somebody, with a female who's being trafficked, if another female approaches her. Trauma-informed care implies sensitivity to the victim's culture, as well as the need for safety and empowerment. Before examining an anxious victim, it may be important to ask if they need a member of clergy. Some societies have deep religious beliefs, and that will help them come to ease. In teaching facilities, it is not uncommon to have medical or nursing students in examining rooms. The presence of additional people may increase the victim's feelings of abuse or paranoia. So if you suspect this is a victim of trafficking, try to not have the students go into the room. Mental evaluation. Overall mood, demeanor, eye contact, response clarity, and orientation should be noted. Suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression are signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, are some of the more common problems reported by victims as a result of abuse by their perpetrators. In 2017, the Department of Justice put out a report: exploited children who have been abused may act more self-confident and mature for their age. It's believed that when children are brought into trafficking at that younger age, and they no longer are going to school, and suddenly they have access to money or independence compared to their peers, they tend to reflect that false sense of self-confidence. Women and girls who are exploited for sex do not always report sexual abuse, but they will report the coercion, threats of violence towards them and their families, and menacing control used against them are similar to those considered as torture by the DOJ. Remember, red flag for identifying these victims is when the victim has difficulty describing their work, where they or when they sleep, what they usually eat, or how many clients they have to serve. If you go to a massage parlor and you ask the masseuse how many clients she sees a day, and she just has no idea, it just has an incredible number. Usually they have to serve high volumes of people. Women and girls trafficked in pornography, often marketed as modeling, often experience rape in transit, establishing early elements of control and fear. PTSD, depression, mood disorders, and anxiety are common reactions to this trauma. Now, looking at the clinical picture, symptoms of PTSD, hyperarousal, feeling jittery, flashbacks or reliving events, changes in feelings or beliefs, paranoia, avoidance of keeping busy, or avoid thinking are all part of this clinical picture. The pervasive symptoms also often lead or are accompanied by the use of alcohol and street drugs. Now, assessing the body. The presence of bruises or wounds in various stages of healing can be clear sign of abuse. A patient that uses her hair or scarves or clothing to hide injuries may be more reluctant to divulge other injuries, such as sore ribs or sprained joints. So if you're doing a physical exam and they jump at something, it's because sometimes they're hiding certain injuries. Again, approach in a non-judgmental manner and try to ask questions. Children may be encountered to simply or encouraged to simply nod their head, and you point at a body part and ask them if this hurts or did this hurt. Ligature marks on the wrists or ankles are signs of immediate intervention. This may indicate severe abuse. Scattered bald spots, particularly on top of the head, may indicate physical restraints by hair pulling. Traumatic alopecia, bite marks, and wounds or cigarette burns are clear sign markers of abuse. Men and women and children who belong to a certain traffic group are often tattooed or branded in their inner thigh, underarm, or in the back of the neck. These markings may be names, symbols, or numbers. To the emergency department or staff, the victim may explain these tattoos as a boyfriend's or relative's name or mark. Observing the gait and posture of the patient can reveal back or leg injuries that the patient may be reluctant to mention. A slow speed of movement or stoop position may indicate depression, fear, or slight extreme fatigue. Somatic complaints of back pain and headaches are common expressions of the subjugation and dominance that is caused by anxiety and depression. Skin inspections should be done on any suspected trafficking victim, and a detailed documentation made in this chart. Exposing skin areas and segments will help to obtain the patient's privacy and dignity. So don't just go into, I've seen them from nursing homes and in our places of work that you don't just go without, you always ask for permission and always approach carefully. Victims of certain cultures, including Vietnamese and Chinese, may present with bruises or pinch marks on the temples as evidence of attempts to stop headaches by pinching or pressure. Rubbing, cut marks, circular bruises on the back also indicate attempts to treat emotional or physical pain. A clinician should examine the extremities, neck, groin, axilla, for needle marks or track marks for any signs of IV drug use. Farm and fishing industry workers have additional injuries related to work. Hand injuries and extensive scarring indicate working without gloves. Skin infections should include the inspections for bites, bed bugs, fleas, usually seen along the groin, waist, or clothing edges. Impetigo in children is a result of extensive insect bites, especially in the legs, and may indicate unsanitary living conditions. Children from farming communities or migrant worker camps may be more prone to skin diseases. Now, assessing for sexual abuse. Although reporting and data collection on the prevalence of disease consequences of sex trafficking is nearly impossible, a systemic overview has found studies that report that HIV and AIDS to range in 22.7 to 45.8% of women who sought healthcare. So up to 45.8% of these women, trafficked women seeking healthcare, have shown to be contaminated with HIV and AIDS. Syphilis, Hep B, and other sexually transmitted diseases and infections were reported in 65.9% of cases. Performing a gynecological examination and test for STIs and hepatitis B is vital, and pregnancy exams should also be conducted. Children should not be overlooked in this examination. However, there are few pediatricians are prepared or comfortable with performing these examinations for sexually trafficking victims, so a gynecologist may need to be consulted. The gynecologist's exam should focus on signs of trauma, such as lacerations, bruises, and scarring. Traffickers have forced victims to use cotton sponges or cotton balls to block menstruation in order to avoid downtime in their sex services. This will obviously lead to scarring and bleeding and infections. This is some of the things you look for. and has to be, if possible, carefully documented in charts. Vaginal injuries, changes in menstrual cycle, acute and chronic pain, and urinary tract infection are a common consequence of rape and forced prostitution. Because a trafficker may have accompanied the patient, he or she will not want the victim to be examined in private. Very likely will not want the doctor to admit the victim. If the victim agrees to be admitted to the hospital for needed care related to the miscarriage, threatened abortion, serious infection, or injuries, hospital security should be alerted. Remember, safety is always your first thing you have to worry about. If something happens to the health workers, they can't help anybody else. So make sure that your work environment stays safe. Victims who choose to leave the clinic or emergency department after receiving only immediate care need to be reassured that they can return whenever they need to. A non-judgmental attitude needs to be used to help them consider further care. A small piece of paper with unlabeled tracking hotline phone number, the human tracking number, can be given to them. A small piece of paper without any labels, just a number. Children who are obvious victims of abuse can be taken into Child Protective Services. When it's an adult that you're dealing with, you have to ask for consent. But if you suspect that there's clear signs of abuse in the child, you can call Child Protective Services and law enforcement, and they can take the child into custody. Now, implementing care. Patient and staff safety cannot be overlooked, as we've already covered. Let's see. The perpetrator has an interest in making sure that the victim does not reveal who inflicted the injuries. Therefore, immediate notification of security and police should be done, as we covered. The patient is transferred to the operating room or intensive care or radiology. Those departments need to be informed of the potential risk. It's estimated that 100,000 to 200,000 American children are sexually exploited, with some being as young as 5 years old. Another 400,000 to 500,000 are involved in child labor and agriculture. At least a third of these children will end up seeking medical care, and the majority will not be recognized and as trafficking victims. This is why we need to take this course. Because they come and we see people like this all the time, we just don't recognize it. Patients treated in the emergency departments or clinics with suspicious injuries, behaviors, or affect changes and other markers of appearance and history should be treated as potential trafficking victims. When the slightest doubt exists that the patient may be a victim of trafficking or domestic violence, photographs should be taken, if possible, with permission. Securing permission for the photographs may be difficult, but taking a few minutes to explain the careful documentation, why you need to take this careful documentation to the patient, and how this may help in the future in case legal action or restitution is sought. Reassure the victim that the photos will not be shared and they will be only part of a medical record. All care procedures should be conducted with gentleness. Victims should be touched only with permission. Ask, I need to touch you here on the neck for injuries, is that okay? If with victims of violence, taking part of the history after some trust is established will increase the information obtained. Documentation. Now, for all my administrators out there, I'm sure you heard that plenty of times. Documentation, documentation, documentation. A comprehensive recording of the patient's history and physical exam is critical in suspected cases of human trafficking. Descriptions may be used for future investigations and legal proceedings. The exact information of the color and the size of bruises, the number of wounds, tattoos, piercings, branding marks, and other evidence is extremely important. Bruises and wounds should not be annotated by color. Instead, should be annotated by color instead of an estimated age of the injury, because patients heal at different rates. Phrases such as, this injury is not consistent with the patient's reported history should be used. Photography should be done only with the patient's consent. Getting the patient's consent helps build trust and can allow the clinician to photograph the patient's face and complete the evidence credibility. If the patient denies human trafficking or exploitation, the evidence should still be carefully recorded along with statements such as human trafficking is suspected. When possible, the exact words of the patient should be documented. Physical reactions to touching, such as jumping or flinching, should be also documented. Many providers have not been formally educated on how to identify and assess these victims. Because victims are more likely to disclose this trafficking information or coercion to healthcare professionals than to police, it is critical that professionals like yourselves know what must be evaluated. Reporting and documenting each case is a good place to start, but working with the community resources and professional organizations and informing politicians should also be a professional part of the professional responsibility. Now, this is my call to arms to everyone listening. This is where you can make a difference. Identifying and caring for victims is just the beginning of the responsibilities for us. States and professional organizations need concerned, informed healthcare professionals to work on committees that are fighting human trafficking. By simply checking professional organizations, web pages, investigation, local resources, for homelessness, meals, and shelters, healthcare workers can have a logical place to start. Perhaps compiling a notebook of community resources nearby, emergency departments, clinic offices. The following is a list of common community resources that may be needed for human trafficking victims. You can compile this. The Salvation Army, crisis centers like for family violence shelters and rape crisis centers, food banks, church meal and relief services like the ransom cafes and Methodist churches or Catholic charities, for example, United Way, Red Cross shelters, and Child Protective Services. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement provides victim assistance under the Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000. Under this law, this agency certifies foreign adult and minor victims of human trafficking for the federal benefits at the same level as a refugee that's admitted legally. These services provide through a network of subcontracted agencies in the country. Those victims will receive a T visa, which is a temporary visa for up to 4 years. During this time, they can try to continue to apply for a permanent residence. This may even extend to certain members of the family, provided authorization is okay. Certified trafficking victims are eligible for housing, food assistance, income, employment, English language training, mental health, and healthcare, and even foster care. Another thing that passed with the Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000 is now federal law enforcement agencies can also request the continued presence permit of a foreign victim of trafficking. If the law enforcement official believes that this victim would be beneficial for a case and wants to keep her, they can actually get a temporary visa as well. The Office of Refugee Settlement also provides guidance for social services. You can contact this office and other governmental offices through the National Human Trafficking Response Center. And all that information is going to be included at the end. So some of the reporting agencies you can approach. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, look beneath the surface, has raised awareness to human trafficking while assisting the public in identifying these victims and services. This agency reported a national survey of victims that disclosed that 50% of the victims had experienced contact with healthcare providers and had not been identified. Now, this 50% is just of the ones that have actually been found and have been rescued. And they're telling you that 50% of them had encountered healthcare professionals throughout their captivity or their victimization and were not recognized as such. Reporting human trafficking may be intimidating or time-consuming, making healthcare professionals reluctant to act. You may fear invading a person's privacy or reporting a case that may turn out not to be a criminal case. Victims sometimes ask for their information or situational information to be kept confidential. In these cases, the healthcare professional is obligated to inform the patient of a suspicion of the situation. Share that you are concerned about the victim's health and that this type of harboring, which may or may not be against the victim's will, should be reported. It is also important to ensure the victim's identity is protected. Failure to report a crime may be considered an omission of duty, as well as something that may put the patient at risk for further injury or even death. Some victims choose not to leave their situation regardless of abuse or how severe the abuse may be, or even identify the situation as exploitative. Fear of retribution or threatened harm to themselves or families may keep the victims from divulging the true nature of the situation. If a person is an adult and it's the individual's choice, the decision has to be respected. Although general information without the patient's identity can still be reported to the authorities. In these cases, you must provide safe care to the patient with a non-judgmental attitude and provide information on resources or crisis centers. If the victim accepts the information, the clinician can provide just a phone number of the National Human Trafficking Center and a small slip of paper. They can hide, again, a small piece of paper without any labels, just a number. They can hide in their pocket or in their shoe. Posting the human trafficking information with phone number, text message, and local crisis resources should be posted in bathrooms where victims may be able to see it. Healthcare providers, as patient advocates, have the ethical and legal obligation to guard the patient's safety by reporting any suspected abuse or potential human trafficking. The patient's identity can be kept confidential. Remember, the National Human Trafficking Center is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 1-888-373-7888. Or you can text to BEFREE, BEFREE. One of the regulations that are coming out now is most healthcare providers have to post this information at their website. Now, another one of the organizations that I was able to contact and explore is the Polaris Project. The Polaris Project was founded in 2002. Polaris is named after the North Star, which people held in slavery in the United States used as a guide to navigate their way to freedom. Today, they're filling the roadmap for the journey and lighting the path ahead. What's interesting about Polaris Project is their approach. And as we mentioned before, we're living in a time of technology, and traffickers use this technology. So they're approaching it in the same fashion. I have a short video that will show you how they approach trafficking.
They mow our lawns and vacuum our offices, paint our nails and paint our houses. They are in the room next door or the house next door. They're in strip malls where anyone can see them, but most of us don't, because most of us don't know where to look. Until now. In 2017, Polaris analyzed one of the largest human trafficking data sets in the United States. We took the broad concepts of sex trafficking and labor trafficking and broke them down into what they really are: criminal operations within 25 distinct businesses. Now, we know where to find them. Now we can start to understand how they got there, how traffickers work, how the businesses are run. Now we know. Now we end it.
Now, it's important to point out also that the Polaris Project, since 2002, they've been manning the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So they are the ones who coordinate those efforts. They connect more than 50,000 victims and survivors to help with the help and assistance, as well as resources for communities to combat this awful crime. The last organization I had the privilege of contacting, it was the Operation Underground. This is really interesting. Actually, the way it started, it was by a ex-CIA agent. He was being trained in counterintelligence and human trafficking, and he encountered somebody who had lost her child, had been stolen. And he made the promise that he would help them. When he went back to his superiors asking, to investigate the trafficking of children, they told him that they could not at this point, that the course was still 2 to 3 more years, and they had to spend more time doing this. So he actually stepped down, and he says he asked his wife, and she gave him the straight answer. She said, "You made a promise, you have to keep it." So he started the Operation Underground Railroad, and in his path to find this missing child, he found 21 young kids that were being exploited. This was funded in 2013, and it is a slightly more militant aspect of the war against child trafficking. They have canine units, they have ex-police officers, and they approach they have grown to where they work with medical personnel, with foreign law enforcement, and they go to multiple countries now, and they actually actively pursue trafficking. I have a small video from them as well, which I was able to contact Laura Commission. She runs the local chapter here, and I was certified under Operation Underground Railroad, and they do some amazing work.
I want to thank all of you for rescuing Mama and bringing her back to us, and she was in safe hands. I am happy, that's all I can say, and I'm thankful.
Operation Underground Railroad?
Yeah.
Guess how much money you have now?
How much?
Okay, so that was actually their 2019 annual report. They said how by March of last year they had saved their 2,000th victim, and by October they had saved their 3,000th victim. And they're proud to announce at this point they have 4,100 victims that have been assisted, and more than 2,300 traffickers around the world have been stopped and arrested. More than 10,000 survivors who were enslaved and exploited at risk have been helped. What's really important about these organizations is, as horrible as finding and rescuing these victims is, that's half the job. Once the victim is saved, without proper help, they most of the time just slide back into that life because that's all they know, or they don't feel they're worthy of anything else. So these organizations go a long way as providing counseling, mental services, job opportunities, employment, and all these things, providing a community for them to hopefully try to thrive once more. These are some of the resources we have that perhaps try to say this the slide or as far as Florida, we have the Florida Abolitionist, Florida Abuse Hotline, the Florida Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and Human Trafficking Screening Tool. In the national stage, we have the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is manned by Polaris Project. Polaris Project themselves, Polaris.org, the Operation Underground Railroad, which we just saw, and the Victim Assistance Program, led by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Human trafficking can be stopped, and victims can be rescued by non-judgmental professionals who look beyond the presenting signs of drug, alcohol, sexual abuse, sexually transmitted diseases, unkept appearances to provide life-saving care. So as we wind this down, I want to leave you with a quote from William Wilberforce, as I mentioned him earlier with Exodus Cry Project. He said that you can choose to look the other way, but now after this, you can never say again that you didn't know. That brings our presentation to a conclusion. Thank you very much, and I think we're going to have some time for questions now. There will be 1 minute. Questions?
Were there any questions on that?
I don't know.
Thank you, Luis. We are going to take a 2-minute break and resume at 10 o'clock. Thanks a lot. Thank you. We'll see you at 10.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary.